you so much for putting up without the chairs and the crowded room and stuff. Your understanding is really appreciated. It's our first time, our first year, with no budget, so we're just kind of improvising the best we can. It'll be better next year. Okay, hold on. So, I don't have any photos. I never carried a camera on the road the last 14 years I've been traveling. Every time someone asked me if I had a camera, I'd say, well, yeah, I have two. They're blue and on either side of my nose. You know, this will be how I document the world. One of the questions that would used to drive me crazy, people would say, what are you running from? I mean, what do you mean what I'm running from? I'm running to something. I'm running to mountains and deserts and beaches. And the truth is, I don't really know how it all got started. You know, maybe there's some urge inside us, some nameless impulse. The same thing that sent Africans on safari, or sent Aboriginals on walkabout, or pilgrims heading off to Rome in the Middle Ages. But what I do know is that the hardest thing usually is coming back. That's when you find out if you've really learned something, if you've really understood something. And the first time I went to India, I was 18 years old. I was there for 7 months, and I found my guru, fried my brains in LSD, dancing on the beaches in Goa. And I came back home, and the first thing that happened to me, I was in a taxi coming back from the station. I looked around at the streets around me, and they were empty. And I said to the driver, well, has something happened? What's going on? And he looked at me in the mirror and went, nah, mate, everything's all right. I was like, where are all the people? Where are the cows and the dogs and the fruit sellers and the beggars and the mad people and the monks? And I couldn't understand it. And I headed back to my parents' house and got shouted at for not writing any postcards. They thought I was dead. 6 months I've been away, it's pre-internet. And then I quickly found that though I was a novelty for the first week, going out for drinks with my friends, pretty soon their eyes began to roll whenever I started a line with, well, when I was in India. And what I found was I had, you know, no skills, no qualifications, no money, and I'd really outgrown my childhood. I'd really outgrown my hometown. But I wasn't yet grown up enough to write myself a news story. I think one thing we suffer from is that there's no real rites of passage left in modern society. Like this passage to manhood in the old days or in other societies was marked by scarification or circumcision. I got asked that a lot in the Muslim world. Or knocking all your teeth out. And there was a definite physical mark, that a vision quest, something which made you a man. Some say for women it happens automatically with menstruation. You get the signal and that's it. All right. You're a woman. Welcome. You know. So it was around about this time that I found about this idea that you could travel without money and that you could just trust in the universe and your trust would take care of you in return. So I was dying to get back to India, to this amazing world, which I could hardly believe even happened now, this dream world. And I started reading around, and I found all these Sufi stories, these dervishes traveling without money. I heard about these Indian monks who would put themselves in the most remote place they could possibly find and wait there, determined to starve to death, until someone came along and fed them, which always happened, at least in the stories you heard about, right? You know. And I even found in the Bible, there's Jesus yelling at his disciples, going, don't worry about what you're going to eat tomorrow. Come on. Have you no trust? So, backed with all this solid spiritual information, I decided to hitchhike to India with no money at all. And, you know, not many people believed it was going to be possible, but, you know, I was naive enough to believe it would be. I think that's one of the strengths of being young, is you're stupid enough to believe in things, and then it becomes possible. So I head off, and in Europe, you know, I was still in my comfort zone, and I was fed and sheltered and looked after and seduced all across Europe. And I arrived in Turkey about 2 weeks into my journey. And that's when, for me, the journey really began. Suddenly, I arrived at some little village about 3 in the morning. I was dropped off, and straight away, it was, now, this was, I had kind of a love affair with Islam at the time, I guess, really into all the Sufi poetry and everything. And this was in days before the real propaganda war started against the Muslims in the modern press. But still, it was really common to turn on the BBC News and you'd have some special report from Iran, and you'd have some guy given a microphone. He goes, "La, la, 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 death to Satan, death to America, la, 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 la." There we have the voice of the Middle East. I knew it couldn't be that way. You know, somebody just told me this has to be bullshit. You know, though I didn't know any Iranians. And what I quickly found was that in the Muslim world, at least as a white boy, it was impossible to go hungry. I mean, impossible. I was drowned in tea everywhere I went. I had kebab virtually stuffed into my mouth. I had mothers who were crying because I wouldn't take more than 5 portions at the dinner table. And, where am I? This is hard, I tell you. And the thing was, it was always the young guys who found me on the street. They're the ones with no jobs, right? And they were like, "Hey, look at the guy here," you know. Sometimes I'd be surrounded by like 10 Turkish guys, and I thought, "Oh shit, I'm gonna get beaten up." And they come all around me, and then the first thing they do is just drag me off to the kebab shop. That was their only intention, was to feed the foreigner after a few laughs, right? But sooner or later, I'd always be introduced to the elders in the community, who would sit me down very gravely, serve me my 15th glass of tea that day, and then the questions would begin. "Are you running away from home? Do you want a job? Do you want a wife? Have you ever thought of becoming a Muslim?" But still, even Turkey was quite safe ground until I came to the Iranian border. And beyond that, I had no idea what to expect. I didn't speak any Farsi or any Turkish, for that matter. But I did buy a little dictionary, and I was communicating one word at a time with my Turkish truck drivers. And they'd take one word, I'd read a word, and we'd have a conversation like this, which almost cost me my life one day, as the Turkish truck driver in question was looking up a word and didn't look where we were going. Rounding a mountain pass, going on the way to Ankara, we came to a sharp curve in the road. He was so absorbed, he didn't look up. And by a miracle, my language cortex kicked in, and I shouted, "Bak!" which was the Turkish word for look. He went, "Ah!" hit on the brakes. And we knocked over this border post that went tumbling down the cliffside. But I came into Iran, and I still had no idea what to expect. I mean, maybe I was being totally naive, and my friends were right. You know, maybe I was really setting myself up for trouble here. And I hitched a couple of rides, and I came down into Isfahan. It was already quite late, about 11 o'clock. Didn't really know where I was going. I was walking through these dark streets, and I passed by a carpet shop. And these 2 guys jumped on me, the first tourists they'd seen in years, probably. They were going, "Carpet, carpet, carpet, carpet!" And like, I couldn't help themselves, you know? I said, "Well, they've got very nice carpets, but you see, I have no money." And their response was, "Well, come and eat something. You must be starved." So they dragged me into the shop, they gave me some eggs and bread. Then he took me down to the Ayatollah Khomeini Square, which is this huge grass area in front of the fabulous blue mosque of Isfahan. And they found me a family who was picnicking on the grass there. And the family acted like they fed stray English hitchhikers every day, you know, so they just helped me with their food. And I got my sleeping bag out, and I lay down on the tiles in this big square, and I thought, okay, so far, so good. Then I see this guy running into the square. It's already quite dark, but he looks quite anxious. And he's running about left and right, and he sees me, and he says, "Are you the English guy sleeping outside tonight?" I'm already inside my sleeping bag. I think, "Yeah?" And he says, "I'm so sorry I haven't got a place to offer you this night. I can't welcome you to my shop because the secret police won't allow it, but it is your first night in my city, and you will not be alone." And he lay down on the ground next to me to sleep. And his teeth were chattering so much with cold in the night, I had to give him half my blankets just to keep him warm. I never really went hungry on the road, so it was difficult in the Muslim countries. But there were nights when I was like shivering under a motorway bridge, it was pouring with rain, and all I had was a packet of stale biscuits to eat. Times when I didn't know who I was or where I was going, what I was doing. And there were dangers too. I wasn't going to tell this one until I heard Anami Kamri's talk, but I thought it was relevant. I came in, yeah. I came into Baluchistan, Pakistan, and I got picked up by a Pakistani bureaucrat in his jeep, and he was delighted for some conversation. And he said, "Well, you have to come along to my office, you know, and we'll have lunch and we will talk, you know, about philosophy." So I went along to his office, and another 2 or 3 guys in there, and they were delighted to have me, you know, and right away they start firing all these questions about English literature and philosophy, you know, and I said, "Sir, you are liking the Sufis, is that right?" And I was like, "Well, yeah," and he goes, "But sir, the Sufis are a very aloof people, isolated from the maddening crowds." Uh-huh. "But sir, Aristotle says man is a social creature." And this is the kind of conversation we had to do for 2 or 3 hours, which they culminated with, "So, what is the current state of existentialism in England?" And it's at that point that another guy walks in the office. And I don't know where he was from. He had more Chinese features than Pakistani, but there's a whole mix of races there. Hard to say. And he sees me, and his eyes just lit up. And ignoring everybody else, he sat down in a chair ahead of me, and he goes, "Ah, welcome to my country." And I was like, "Hello." And he says, "Oh, so you're here to know Pakistan and our culture. You must come and visit me in my village." And by now, Azmat, the Pakistani who took me there, is standing behind him. But I had, at that time, about 20 rupees in my pocket, and, you know, I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. It was already late afternoon, and so I kind of ignored him and said, "Well, yeah, that could be nice." He goes, "Yes, you'll come to my house. We will serve you the finest local foods. You will get to know our culture." And Azmat goes, and it continues for some time until eventually, reluctantly, I take the hint and I see my friend Azmat is not going to be happy about this. And he brought me here. It's common courtesy. I just take his advice, right? So I say, "Well, I'm sorry. I have to get back on the road. You know how it is." And I walked out of the office and into Azmat's jeep, and I was furious, you know. I mean, these opportunities don't come that often to really be welcomed. In all that time, I'd hardly stayed more than one night in one place. I was exhausted. I was hungry. I needed a wash. I said, "Azmat, what was that all about? You know, this guy was wanting to help me out." And he goes, "My friend, if you went with that man, he'd come in the night and fuck you." Really? I mean, he was only kind of small. I'm just, "He'd come with 3 men. They all hold you. They all fuck you." And I realized how close I just come without even knowing it. Actually quite a common thing for young guys hitchhiking in Pakistan. And normally it's good to stay clean on the road. I like Anik when we brought that up. You can always afford a bar of soap, but in Pakistan it actually helped me to grow a bit more of a beard and be unwashed with, because unattractive as possible. So after 4 months, I arrived to India, down on the beach in Goa, where I was seeing all my old friends, and I was a good deal thinner, as you might imagine. And I arrived there, and I suddenly realized I had to get myself a plot. I had to do something. You know, I had no money left. And it's one thing when you're traveling to have no money, because you kind of helped along as a pilgrim. Your stories kind of merit you a bowl of rice. That's all good. But then, once you arrive in a place, you've got to look after yourself. Otherwise, you're living off other people. So my immediate economic plan to feed myself the next day was to write a book. You know, I was kind of naive. You know. I had no skills, couldn't do anything. But writing I could do. And so some very understanding friends bought me some pen and paper. Every time the pens or paper would run out, they'd buy me some more. And various kind of sympathetic, kind people through the season bought me bowls of rice. After 4 months, I had a manuscript, which almost came to, that's right, I was going every day to a German bakery to write 2,000 words a day. That was my target. And the employees there, they'd see me come in, order my 4 whole wheat bread rolls with water, and after 2 days, they wouldn't take my money anymore. They were just like, "Please, don't take it." Or when the boss wasn't looking, they'd slip me a cappuccino or a cinnamon roll, you know. So I got my manuscript together, but the whole thing almost came to a very zen ending. One day on the beach, I was drinking a coconut. I turned around and saw with horror a cow had come along and was already halfway through the last 5 pages. And luckily the fruit lady was there with a machete in hand and ran over and chased this cow away. So we probably wouldn't be here but for her. So I had this manuscript, and I sold photocopies of it all season in the Himalayas. That was 90,000 words on 40 sheets of paper. Everyone went blind trying to read it. And next season, I came back down to Goa, and I borrowed some money to print up 500 copies of the book, hand to mouth to India. And I started selling the books everywhere. Selling them on the beaches, in the markets, in the techno parties, bouncing up and down, approaching people. I broke all the rules, so it was fine. And I even became famous for a few weeks, which after being a nobody for a year and a half was a good feeling, you know. I even had one German guy in a bakery walk up to me and say, "Hey, did you hear about this English guy? He walked all the way from England," you know. Legend began to grow. I was really tempted to let the legend slide, but that would have been a missed opportunity to sell a book, of course, you know. So I sold a whole pile of books, and now I had money to leave India, finally, which was an amazing feeling, you know. Except that, when you go to India, you get a visa which lasts 6 months. And I'd been there a year and a half, which was a slight difficulty. I didn't exactly know what happens to you when you're with an inspired visa in India. It did happen to me once that season. I walked into a cafe, and I heard an Australian girl say to one of her friends, did you hear about Yan? Yeah, they caught him up in Kulu Valley without a visa. He's in jail now." So I turned around and walked out of the cafe. That was not existing in my reality. And somehow I just decided to trust that everything would work out okay. And so it happened one February morning. I heard a voice down the bottom of my garden in Goa. "Hey, Tommy, you there?" I'm sticking my head out. And I see it's a guy called Amsterdam Dave. That's funny. Amsterdam Dave was a 60-year-old freak who'd been going to Goa for the last 30 years at least. He had a kind of silly, putty, kind of caricature face that comes when you take a gram of cocaine a day for 30 years. But he was a really kind guy, and he called me over. I walked into the jungle at the bottom of my garden, and he goes, "Tommy, you got a problem with your visa, right?" "Yeah." He goes, "Well, take this." And he passes me this plastic bag. I go, "Well, what's inside?" I don't want to know. I go, "What, do you want it back?" "I don't want to know." And he disappears into the jungle. So I go back to my room, and I lock the door, open up the plastic bag, and I find inside wooden stamps. Exit stamps, entry stamps, a big visa stamp. So all I have to do now is make it look like I left India a year ago, got a new visa, and came back in a few weeks before. Okay. Headed down to town. I had to get the date stamps made individually to make sure it was accurate, and I had to buy the ink. But luckily, Indian immigration seemed to go shopping in the same shops I did, because there was only blue and red ink available. Perfect match. You know, I was like, okay, it's a good start. Went back to my room, lots of sheets of paper, and started practicing. You know, you're going to practice before you do this thing, right? I ought to say at this point, I'm not the most practical person in the world. You know, I have trouble changing a light bulb, so I was kind of nervous to do this, but I couldn't trust anyone to do it for me. So I was on my own. You know, I had to do this. And so I practiced for several days, obsessively. And finally came the moment, I said, okay, it's a very Zen thing, you just got to do it right now. So I opened up a fresh page, got the visa stamp, the blue ink, put it in the passport, leaned on all four corners, said a very silent prayer, lifted it up. It wasn't perfect, but nothing in India is. You know, a few smudges you can probably get away with, so I figured so far so good. I picked up the exit stamp to make it look like I'd left India, put it in, good job, absolutely great. Now on a wave of confidence, I pick up the entry stamp, put it in, and picked up the wrong date stamp. Now it looked like I left a couple of weeks ago when I would have been expired visa anyway. Wait, the ink is still wet. Ran to the corner of my room, picking up the clothes, flying, grabbed the passport, opened it to the right page, and the ink came off on my finger. Trembling by now, I put the right entry stamp in, and All was left was the entry stamp to make it look like I came in a couple of weeks ago. Stamp the blue ink, put it in the passport. I forgot to change color. It's blue for exit and red for entry. So now all I could do was put the entry stamp in the right color and the right date. And now I had to cover out this entry stamp with blue ink, so I smudged over it, hoping it wouldn't look too suspicious. Brings the emotion back. And I decide, no, that won't work. I've got to make it look like ink ran through the passport. So I turn the page and put a bit of ink there. And then a bit of ink on the next page. A little bit less each time, right? Clever. Until in the end, my entire passport is just covered with this stuff. Just like, who's going to let me through any border with this? So I didn't dare try an airport now, you know. So instead I chose the most remote, isolated border post with Nepal that I could find. And it was probably the longest journey of my life going there. The last 5 miles I had to do on a bicycle rickshaw, which went along about 2 miles an hour. And I thought these were my last few hours of freedom, you know. And I got to the border post, but then I saw it was on a road going downhill into Nepal. So I figured the feng shui was really good, right? And I walked up to the border post, and a policeman comes out, green military uniform, hands out his hand like that, without a word. And of course, I, to look relaxed and comfortable, just start talking. I see there's no snow on the ground. Does it get very cold here in the winter? I guess it's not mango season, huh? Takes my passport. He flicks it open to the visa page, just stares at it. And I just continue talking. And by now, he starts flicking through the pages with disdain, and he sees the mess I've made of my passport. His first words are, "What this?" I said, "Oh, my baby boy, his name is Krishna. One morning he take camera, he take pens, make such a big mess." He walked back into the station, and I'm standing out there on the road thinking, should I just make a run for it and hope? I don't know by now, right? I'm sure he's going to phone up Bombay Airport and find out if I really did fly in a few weeks before. Instead, he comes out with this entry book for me to sign, to write down my name, my family name, again, my hobbies. And I walked through the border to Nepal and kind of rejoined the rest of my life. So from then on, I carried on traveling. I flew to Turkey and hitchhiked to Israel, and I started averaging about 10 countries a year. I still had no real money. I mean, the money I made from the books lasted a little while, but essentially I was just abusing people's kindness and hospitality, because I came out of India after a year and a half of being in this dream. I had no idea that people still paid rent or had jobs or anything. It took quite a long time for this information to sink in, you know. But as far as I went, flow. As far as I went, the refuses I got, and the one thing I learned was never to lose hope. And so it happened a few weeks before the millennium. I was staying on a friend's couch in my hometown, been back there a few weeks, hand to mouth to India. It was supposed to get published, but the date was being delayed. And my friend obviously wanted to get rid of me. You know, I've been there about 2 weeks already, eating from his refrigerator, you know. And I had about 10 pounds to my name. And I was really feeling a bit gloomy, you know, and the skies were dark. And I walked into town, into a bookshop, and I was just browsing through the books, and I found this book on Jewish mysticism. I don't know anything about that, so I picked it up, and on the page I flicked to, there was this phrase from this rabbi, and it said, "The only real sin is to lose hope. Despair is the only real sin." I thought, I like that. I looked at it suspiciously, picked it up, and I heard a voice from a guy called Clive, who I'd met in India. He went, "Tom, is that you? Oh, thank God. Listen, I don't know if you heard. My girlfriend just got arrested in Delhi airport with 5 kilos of hashish. What are you doing these days, Tom? I don't suppose you mind flying out to India, would you? To go and visit her in jail and see the lawyer and that. I'll pay for everything. 6 days later, I was on a flight to India, embarking on this whole story. And that was the amazing thing, just how your world could flip around in a matter of a heartbeat. But this journey kind of broke my love affair with India in many ways. You know, before then, I'd just been with travelers, hanging out in chai shops and on the beaches and the parties. And sure, I'd hitched through India and traveled a bit, but I never really had to get that far involved. And now I had to go to the jail and meet lawyers. And the very first time I went to see his girlfriend in jail there, I went along to Tihar jail at 8 o'clock in the morning and signed my name, completely paranoid the police might grab me. Waited for 4 hours, and then we came to walk inside the visiting room, where I imagined we'd sit down at a table and have a civilized conversation about best way to get out of jail. But instead, there was a huge queue of pushing Indians, because the queue system has never really sunk in India. It's every person for themselves, right? And they were pushing so much, I actually leant back on them like this as we were walking closer to the gate. And then I got searched by the guards at the gate. And later I found out why they were being so prohibitive. And when you go to Tihar jail to visit somebody, you can't take any sweets or chocolates. Because once upon a time, somebody had given some drugged sweets to a guard, the guard fell asleep, and the prisoner escaped. So no more sweets. No plastic bags. Because one prisoner had tried to make a key from all these scrunched up plastic bags. And if any of you have ever seen Indian locks, they're really not that hard to pick. He'd picked the lock with this improvised plastic key and escaped. So no plastic bags, and I'm holding all the fruit and cake and bread and everything in my arms. And then they pulled out the bananas, too. Any guesses? It being a female jail, and of course in India, morality always being a very high concern, they were worried that some of their female prisoners might be using these bananas for immoral purposes. And so we go in, and there's 2 dark corridors. And I'm thinking, well, there must be a door here somewhere. And everyone's already running. There's bells ringing, you can hardly hear a thing. And suddenly I hear Natasha's voice on the other side of 2 fences, screaming my name. And I said, oh, where can we talk? She says, here! Here? You have to fight! These people are animals! So, okay, so I find myself a place at the fence by elbowing someone to the side, and I start behaving like everybody else. And now suddenly we're yelling between these 2 fences at each other. So what about the lawyer? She goes, where's Clive? And I don't know! We're yelling, this is how we have to talk. And then suddenly she just starts losing it and starts banging her head against the fences and just screams, there's no God in here! There's no God in here! And that was how we started. And it's carried on for the next 4 months before we finally managed to get her free a couple of months later by bribing, I shouldn't say this on camera, by finding a creative solution and rewarding an Indian judge for their diligence and sense of justice. But this really was the flip side of the whole India traveler trip. I never really thought about it before, but loads of the travelers who were actually on the road I saw every year, they were all smugglers. That was what they did, that's how they were there. Well, they weren't working for a living. Everyone would go back with hash inside their shoes or in their suitcase, or they'd swallow half a kilo and go. And that was how they lived. And what happened was, that was fine when it was fine, but when things went wrong and someone went to jail or hospital, if things went wrong inside their stomach, there was almost no one there. And that really showed me something about the whole traveler trip. And those couple of years in Goa that I was there, 4 or 5 years, about 3.5 years I was there in total in India, I'd caught the last wave of a freak scene that happened in the 60s, and then turned to a techno movement in the late 80s, and was now crashing on the shore of development. It was all over, really. The mafia were coming in, the police were coming in, and the freaks were getting kicked out, even though they were the ones who started the whole scene and brought the money there. So suddenly, I was at quite a loss for myself. I couldn't hang out in Goa anymore. India had lost its charm. And it was time for me to try and encounter the rest of the world. I just went from extreme situation to extreme situation, living on miracles the entire time. I always find myself the new language and a new culture and a new economy, meeting new people in new places, always living on the edge. And in fact, I got addicted to it. If I hung around anywhere for more than a couple of weeks, it felt boring. Conversations in people's houses felt dull. I was like, is this it? Is that all there is? And so I took ever more random roads I could possibly find. And each of these roads I took really just took me even further away from myself. Until it came 2001, I decided to try and restart my life. I took a whole new direction. So I took a one-way ticket to Thailand, and I arrived there with about £100 in my pocket that I'd begged off the English government for a few weeks. And my idea was to teach English. I feel like, I speak English. How hard can it be to teach it, I had enough money to last me about 3 weeks, confident of finding a job. I arrived in Thailand and discovered that the whole country was on holiday for a month. Great planning, huh? Research. So I turned to the traveler's best friend, internet. Still something quite novel in those days. And I looked at all the English teaching sites, and I found out that in South Korea, not only did they pay you a lot more, about $2,000 a month, they gave you a free apartment as well. And they paid for your flight ticket there. I was like, wow, this is great. Scan down the page, oh, but you need a university diploma. So until then, of course, I just had a degree from the University of Life, having first set off at 18. But I was always told education is something you should invest in. So I headed down to Kosan Road and bought myself a fake diploma for $50. A new graduate in English literature from Sussex University. I posted it off to a career agent in Seoul. And he set about getting me a job. Called me up about a week later and said, yeah, I got your diploma, all looks good. Do you happen to have your transcripts with you? Transcripts? I didn't even know what transcripts were. I was like, I wonder if that's something that's too big to fit in my rucksack. Could I blag that? Anyway, he was a bit uneasy about it, but he swallowed this lack of transcripts. And before long, I flew to South Korea, and I arrived with about £10 left in my pocket, really on the edge now. And I don't know how the rest of South Korea is, but at least the town I was in was a tedious, boring corporate hell. I walked into English school, there were 30 bosses, it seemed, all dressed up in uniforms, and it felt like I couldn't last a month in that place, never mind a year. So it was kind of a relief when in one of my lessons, when I could finally get the students to talk, because every time I'd ask them a question, the girls would say, ha, and cover their mouth. The guys, I'd ask a question, they'd say, didn't you? Okay, never mind. Just the exercise on the board, it's all right. And so midway through one of my lessons, at about my beginning of my third week, I think, the manager walks in, this American-Korean woman called Mary, bless her. And she said, Teacher Tom, could you just join me outside for a moment? I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, class, continue what's on the board. Walked out into the corridor, and she said, this is kind of embarrassing. I just came back from the immigration office. The man there doesn't think your diploma is real. I told him it was, but would you just mind calling your university for us to confirm everything? So I had to do some very fast thinking. This is November 2001. So I said, yeah, sure, mate, I'd love to, but thing is, since 9/11, there's all kinds of new security, about identity and all of this. I'm going to have to write them a letter, get my social security number before they release that kind of information. She wasn't very happy about it, but I managed to hold out just until my first paycheck. And the atmosphere in the school in those last few days before my paycheck, I tell you, the directors were staring at us, you're going to make a run for it, aren't you? And I was like, talking about buying a car or something, to prove I was going to stay there. got the first pay in my pocket, and of course jumped on the first boat to Japan. Why Japan? Because I'd heard reliably from travelers that I'd met in India, Israeli travelers, because I spent some time in Israel in the meantime, that you can make a killing on the streets of Tokyo selling silver rings, cotton bracelets, and fake Rolex watches. So I phoned up one of the Israeli bosses, because by that time the Israelis pretty much dominated the street markets there, the kind of Israeli mafia, who made all the deals with the Japanese mafia for the places. The deal was you turned up, they gave you a place on the street, a few lessons in selling, gave you the security of the Japanese mafia, Yakuza, and then you got 40% of what you sold. You know, this seemed better than teaching English in Korea. Haha. So I flew to Tokyo, and I quickly realized I was about to work with sharks. I mean, these people were ruthless, you know. They'd be like, of course it's real silver, on their street stall every day. And when the Israelis met the Japanese, it was like a new predator walking into an ecology that had never had predators before. They just devoured them, you know. The Israelis having no real sense of borders, and the Japanese not knowing how to confront anybody, and so they took millions and millions and millions out of Japan over the years, and they're still doing it. Fair play, you know. So the first thing to do was get me trained up, right? So I was introduced to some of the workers on the street. And the first guy I was taken to see was a very tall Israeli called Yoni. I came along to his stall in the middle of this busy shopping area, and he looked me up and down and said, "So, are you Jewish?" I was like, well, no. He goes, no one's perfect. Now, Yoni's method of selling, I'm not sure you'd find this taught in any course anywhere. He had a large inflatable hammer. And when the Japanese would cross the road towards him, at this pedestrian crossing, he'd run over, hit them on the head with the hammer, grab the first one who was dazed, all the way over to his stall, and even if he didn't stay, other Japanese would come along following the movement. He said, "You see, Tommy? These people are like animals. They are sheep. We are the wolves." I said, how the fuck am I ever going to do this job? So, you know, I got my little place set up on the street eventually when they decided they could trust me, I guess, for all the watches and the rings and stuff. And, you know, I had all my Japanese phrases written down, you know. I'll probably butcher the pronunciation if I try now, but I had to stand there all day saying, "Irashaimase! Watashi wa ichiban koko desu." All these phrases, which essentially meant, "Welcome to my stall, please come look at my things, I am the cheap and best, looking is free." In short, all those really annoying phrases I'd heard all those years in India and all the way across. And now I was one of those people. But slowly I learned the tricks of selling on the street in Japan, which are manifold. There's a lot of interesting psychology you have to get into. One of the best things you could do, though, apart from throwing in a bit of string to secure a deal, which always worked really well. Hasho? Yeah, just for you. The best trick you ever do was something called janken. And janken was a game known in the rest of the world as scissors, paper, stone. And this worked with every strata and section of Japanese society, whether it was students or old people or men or women, it didn't matter. It was like some ancient samurai code that everyone seemed to respect. So what we do is I tell you what, let's play janken. If you win, you pay 4,000. If I win, 6,000. And before they could protest, I go into my janken warm-up. They start laughing. And then, if I was having a bad day, I'd watch what they were throwing in the air and then throw the winning signal. Oh, I'm sorry. It's going to be 6,000 yen. Ching, ching, ching. But it was really in this time I began to lose my way because, A, I was really becoming a different person. I wasn't myself anymore. This was far from who I was when I arrived. But just standing there on the freezing winter streets of Tokyo for 12 hours a day, every single day of the week, without rest, living in this foreigner's guest house where there were 8 of us in one room, sharing these bunk beds, all I could think about was numbers just rolling in front of my eyes. And on a good day, you felt like king of the world. People give you money for nothing. But on the bad days, and there were many, many, many of them, I would just be standing there on the street in front of my stall of worthless trinkets with fake Rolex watches in my pockets like some dodgy Cockney, gangster. And I would just stand there crying. And I would just stand and cry and cry and cry for hours at a time, scaring the customers away even further, which made me feel even worse, right? And all I could really think, and until there came a day around Christmas when I went back to the center, we were all working there, and it was like a great time to sell. And on one day, I actually sold more than Yoni did. And he walked up to me at the end of the day, saw my takings and his, and he went, "Are you sure you're not Jewish?" I was like, "No." And he goes, "What? So how come you're so smart?" Okay. It's a classic moment. So now, with my savings, I jumped across to Europe and then over to Latin America, always looking for paradise, right? Quite sure it would just be one country further, one beach further. I didn't like these people, but those people, the Mexicans, the Colombians, the Brazilians, of course, these would be my people. I would find my dream love. I would stay in one place, make a home again. I was desperate to find somewhere to really settle down. And so it was, I came to Rio de Janeiro. And I pretended to get my life together for a while, right? I learned Portuguese. I was hitting on girls every single day, And it was around about this time that I got involved in some business which I'm really not comfortable at talking about on camera. And I really didn't quite understand how illegal what I was doing was. But there came a day when I became aware. I was talking to an associate, and he said in his inimitable, toothless way, "I smell bacon." I looked around, and I saw two guys behind us on the table who were obviously undercover police, listening on our conversation. And I felt like 3 iron anvils just arrived on my head and my shoulders. And I went back home, trying to think how I could get myself out of this terrible situation I got myself into. And I was lying in bed that night, and suddenly, bang! It felt like all the energy in my body, from my feet, ran up my center, my spine, it wasn't Kundalini, and exploded in my head. And then it happened again. Shpang! Shpang! And it was all I could do to keep this down. And I would try to just massage my stomach, and I'm kind of hyperventilating through panic by now. And I'm trying to massage my feet, and I remember what bits of Qigong I used to know, and then keep this calm and relative. But these rushes kept coming, and I thought, well, maybe if I sleep, it'll get better. So I lay down, and I got a spasm of back pain came along. And the more I couldn't sleep, the worse these rushes got, and the less I could control it. And I started getting really, really, really fucking scared. I didn't know if I was going to survive the night. I didn't know if I was about to have an epileptic fit or go into a stroke or what. Somehow I stayed awake pretty much all the night. I think I passed out once or twice. I got to the morning, and all I knew was I couldn't do another night like that ever again. I thought, well, unless I find some way to deal with this today, find some acupuncturists, some neurologists, anything, I've got to start thinking about how I can commit suicide, because I cannot allow this to happen. This is so out of my comfort zone, so beyond any threshold I've ever had. So I found an acupuncturist that day. It seemed to make it a little bit better. And what did I do in the worst crisis and trauma of my life? Did I call up friends? Did I call up family? No, of course not. I went off alone to a little village in northeast Brazil to try and work it out. And I couldn't read a book without a rush coming. I couldn't meditate without a rush coming. Even when I was making love, sometimes a rush would come, and I'd freak out and panic, and the girl I was with would look at me like she was getting even nervous, more nervous than me. And then every night for the next year and a half, every time I lay down, I got at least 5 rushes. So I was sleeping in the end with like 6 pillows stacked up because somehow it got worse when I lay on my back. And it was about this time that I realized I had to do something about this. So I flew to England and I worked like a dog all summer, about 75-hour weeks to save money. Took a flight to Israel, where I'd spent some time previously, just on a hunch that I might find the right person. I was really lucky. I found a therapist who was prepared to negotiate this obstacle course of my personality. And it was then that she really explained something to me, which is that we think we know who we are. We have ideas and opinions, plans, things we're going to do. But do we really have any idea who we are? Is it just the personality that we've accumulated over the years, all these defense mechanisms we have to win praise or to avoid criticism? Do we have any idea who we really are? Is there a deeper self? You might call it a soul. And this soul talks to us in a very quiet whisper the whole time, which is why we never hear it, right? Until one day, and it might never happen to you even, but one day that soul wakes up and bam, lets you know about it. And that's it. And then you have no choice but to confront who you've become and really find out who you are. And it was then that it really brought to mind this Taoist story of this man who's terrified of the sound of his own footsteps and terrified of his own shadow. So what does he do? He starts running, obviously. But the faster he runs, the louder his footsteps are, and the faster his shadow is now following him. And this guy in the story runs and runs and runs and runs until he drops down dead of exhaustion. When all he actually had to do was sit in the shade and he wouldn't see a shadow anymore. And if he sat down, he wouldn't hear the sound of his own footsteps. And that was how I felt I'd become over these years. And so this therapist, this beautiful healer, she really taught me that there's no one to be, there's nothing to do, and there's nowhere to go. And I realized that all these years, all these amazing journeys, blah, 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 going here, doing this, great stories, at dinner table after, it was just trips. Just trips and trips and trips. Going north, south, east or west. It didn't really matter because the only direction ever to really go in is in. It was around about this time that, when I was getting this therapy, that we started roadjunkie.com. And at first, it was kind of like a catharsis. Just trying to get everything out of my head that had happened over these years, the stories and the tips that we had. And it quickly began to grow into something more. And I found out that there were as many people out there as sick of the whole consumer travel thing as I was. The whole guidebook generation, all these destinations that were being sold to people. People talking about, well, yeah, first I did Australia, then I did New Zealand, I did Thailand, and then, how can you do a country? And what we found out was, as we came out with this new kind of subjective, outspoken voice, that there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of road junkies out there who felt the same way. And having a sense of community somehow made it all better for us, knowing we weren't alone out there, that we might meet up, even in a place like this. It could be okay. People talk a lot about travel to find themselves. You know, go off to Southeast Asia, 3 months, traveling to find themselves. I think you have to lose yourself first. I think you have to lose the idea of who you've become, first of all. But all the same, you do have to head out there. You might know the story. It was made popular by Paulo Coelho and The Alchemist, but it's actually a very old Middle Eastern story. This guy's living in Baghdad, and he has a dream. And he sees this house in Cairo with a basement full of gold. Being a big believer in dreams, he sets off with his camel and all his bags, and they head across the desert, and they have this terrible journey. And his camel dies halfway through. He has to walk the rest of the way. He's robbed, he's beaten, and he arrives in Cairo finally, about half his original weight, and he tries to find the house, but he can't find it anywhere. I mean, Cairo is a huge city. And the chief of police comes along and catches him and goes, thief! He goes, no, believe me. He goes, oh, he take you away. He goes, no, I had this dream. Police chief says, yeah. Go on. I had this dream about this basement full of gold in Cairo. And the chief of police just starts laughing. You fool. I also had a dream like that one day. There was a house with a yellow wall and a blue door in Baghdad. And a cellar was full of gold. But do you think I'm stupid enough to head off there and look for it? And of course, the house he describes is that young man's very house back in Baghdad. So everything he ever needed was already there, but he had to make this whole journey to find out before he could go back. I don't know if you ever really do find yourself. You know, I mean, all the pretty philosophies and spiritual ideas we have, they kind of work for a while. But I think it's something that slips out of your grasp the whole time. It's quite illusory. But what I do know is that meeting yourself is a journey you do every single day. But after a while, it's not about running away anymore. It's about coming back home. Thank you.